when you have functions, you can have inverse functions. So here we've got a function that turns x into y. So if we want to find the inverse function, which is noted as f minus 1 of x, what we have to do is change the subject from being y to being x. So what do I mean? Right, so we start with our function, 3x minus 7, all divided by 2 equals y. So I multiply by 2. I'm going to add 7. And now I'm going to divide by 3. And now I've made x the subject. So instead of x being the input, now x is the output. And now one really important thing when you're doing this for GCSE, okay, for notation, we have to make sure that we swap the x's and y's. So when I write the final answer, the inverse of f of x is 2x plus 7 all divided by 3. So I have to do that last little switcheroo between the x's and the y's. Right, now, this is the unusual form of the same question. So here I've got a quadratic and I'm trying to find the inverse of that quadratic. So I'll do the same thing. I'll write y equals 5 plus 6x minus x squared. And I want to make x the subject. But because it's a quadratic, that's difficult. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the completing the square form to do it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do y equals 5 minus 3 minus x all squared. So if you imagine, normally when we do this, we say that the quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c. So here, a was minus 1, b is 6. So I've taken half of that. And now I've got to subtract, or in this case, because it's being, what I'm going to end up with is, I get a 9 from 3 squared. So actually, I've got to add that back. Because when I expand 3 minus x times 3 minus x, I get 9 minus 3x minus 3x plus x squared. Okay, and remember we're subtracting all of that, so what I get is minus x squared plus 6x minus 9. And I need to then get rid of that because that's something new. So I add 9 at the end. Right, okay, so now that means that y is equal to 14 minus 3 minus x all squared. Okay, so now we can start to make x the subject. So simply y minus 14 equals 3 minus x all squared. So now we will, oh, sorry, don't forget that's a minus. Oops. So now we're going to swap sides to make this a positive. So I've got 3 minus x all squared equals, now I'm subtracting the y and adding the 14. So I've got 14 minus y. Okay, now I'm going to take the square root. So 3 minus x equals, now very important we don't forget, that's plus or minus because there are two answers. 14 minus y. Now again, I want x to be a positive, so I'm going to take the y on the other side and the x on this side. So I add x. So I've got 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 14 minus, oh actually let's write that the other way around. So I'm going to write that that's x plus or minus the square root of 14 minus y. And now I'm going to subtract this. So that means that 3 plus or minus the square root of 14 minus y equals x. And now x is the subject. So the same thing, don't forget, I've got to swap my x and my y. So when I write g minus 1 of x, that's going to be 3 plus or minus the square root of 14 minus x. Okay, that's my inverse function. So remember, it's using the completing the square form to make x the subject. Otherwise, I end up with an x on both sides. Right, now the second part says the domain. What's the domain of that? Okay, well, what we have to remember is that our input comes from the domain of g of x. Okay, and then when I apply g of x to the domain, I end up with the range. Okay, and that's my output. Now, when I do the inverse, what I'm doing is I'm going back to the start. So my inverse takes the values in the range and maps them back to the domain. So what it means is that the domain of g minus 1 is the same thing as the range of g of x. Okay, so what's the range of g of x? Well, it says the domain is x is greater or equal to 3. So if I've got 5 plus 6x minus x squared, and x is greater or equal to 3, I've got to work out what that value is. Okay, so the maximum value for this, again, if I take the, if I look at my completed the square form, okay, my completed the square form was 14 minus 3 minus 3x. Okay, this is what we wrote here. And that 14 tells me the y coordinate of the maximum point. So that means the maximum output of our function. So that means that the range of g of x is less than or equal to 14, because that's the maximum point. So what's the domain of g of 1? The domain of g inverse x is less than or equal to 14, because they are the same thing.